Thebes, a city of gods, kings, and shadows. In the year 1150 BCE, its temples rose like mountains of sandstone, its avenues lined with sphinxes. At the heart of it all stood the Temple of Amun, the beating soul of Egypt's power. Priests and scribes moved like veins within its walls, keeping the kingdom alive through numbers, prayers, and secrets. But one morning, silence fell. A man who had stood at the center of this system, one of the temple's scribes, was gone. No body was ever found, no farewell note, no tomb inscription to preserve his name. Instead, there was only a single shard of stone, an ostracon, lying face down on the temple floor. An unfinished hymn was scratched into its surface, as if cut short mid-thought. To the Egyptians, to place a text upside down was to deny it, to strip it of its power. Why would a scribe, the guardian of sacred words, leave such a thing behind? Was it a warning, a desperate message, or perhaps the signature of a crime? When archaeologists later pieced together the traces of this disappearance, the mystery only deepened. Papyrus fragments were found with whole sections cut out by a sharp blade. Footprints of crystallized salt lingered where no salt belonged, and witnesses reported a heavy scent of resin clinging in the air long after the scribe was gone. Resin, the perfume of the embalmer's workshop, but also the prized substance of smugglers. Thebes at this time was not a city at peace. The reign of Ramesses III had stretched Egypt thin. Wars drained the treasury. Droughts withered the fields. Even the tomb builders of Deir el-Medina, men who worked for the pharaoh himself, had gone on strike when their wages of grain failed to arrive. Corruption spread like cracks through a desert statue. And at the center of this fragile order sat the Temple of Amun, a vault of immense wealth, guarded on paper by men with ink and reed pens. The missing scribe was one of these men. His work was more than clerical. It was political, spiritual, and dangerous. Each tally of barley, each note of oil or incense could decide whether the gods were honored or robbed. To falsify such records was to commit treason. To expose them was to court death. So when he vanished, the silence was deafening. To erase a name in Egypt was the second death, more final than the grave. And yet, in that silence, the fragments spoke louder than words. A shard of limestone, a papyrus cut, salt in the dust, resin in the air. What happened in those temple corridors? Was the scribe silenced for uncovering too much? Did he fall victim to the very corruption he recorded? Or did he leave behind clues, hoping that someone, someday, would understand? This is the story of the vanished scribe of Thebes, an ancient true crime, half buried in sand, half preserved in ink. And tonight, we reopen his file. Thebes in the year 1150. BCE was a city caught between glory and decline. Its temples gleamed in the sun, their walls carved with triumphs of pharaohs past, yet its streets whispered of hunger and unrest. The Nile still flowed, bringing life to the fields, but the harvests were smaller than before. The empire had stretched itself thin. Wars against foreign invaders drained the coffers, while droughts gnawed at the people's patience. At the heart of the city stood the Temple of Amun, greater than a palace, richer than a king's treasury. Within its walls were silos stacked high with grain, storerooms filled with oil and incense, and chambers where priests and scribes weighed the offerings of an empire. It was a sacred place, but also a vault of immense wealth. And with wealth came temptation. The scribe who vanished served here. To most, a scribe might appear a simple clerk, bent over papyrus with reed pen in hand. But in Egypt, the ability to write was power. Only a handful in the kingdom could master the language of gods and kings. The scribe was one of them, and each mark of his pen could change destinies. He tallied the barley brought from distant provinces, noted the silver tribute of Nubia, and recorded the incense delivered from Punt. His scrolls were the arteries of the temple's wealth, and through them flowed not only grain and gold, but power itself. Each day, he would enter the temple precinct through the eastern gate, his small wooden pallet tucked under his arm, red and black inks ready for the day's accounts. He would pass towering columns, painted with the colors of dawn, hear the chants of priests rising like smoke into the sky, and then sit in the chamber of records, where silence was broken only by the scratching of pens on papyrus. This was his world: words, numbers, offerings, and the delicate balance between truth and danger. For to be a scribe in these times was perilous. Egypt's economy strained under pressure, and corruption seeped into every corner. Officials siphoned grain, priests inflated tallies, guards diverted rations before they reached the workers who carved tombs in the Valley of the Kings. Ordinary people muttered in frustration, and the artisans of Deir el-Medina had already laid down their tools in history's first recorded strike, demanding the grain they were owed. The scribe knew this. His records crossed paths with every theft, every deception. He could expose the fraud, or he could hide it, and that choice may have sealed his fate. Archaeologists have found fragments of papyrus from this time, sliced sharply as though by knife. Lines of grain tallies missing, whole sections erased. Was someone covering tracks, or was the scribe himself attempting to preserve evidence, only for it to be destroyed after his disappearance? Among the ruins, there was also the Ostracon, the shard of limestone with an unfinished hymn placed face down. To turn a text upside down was to strip it of its magic, to cancel its meaning. Why leave such a thing in the Chamber of Records? It feels less like an accident and more like a message. And then there's the strangest detail of all, the smell. Accounts describe a pungent resin scent that lingered in the scribe's office. Resin, the lifeblood of embalming, used to seal the dead for eternity. But resin was also contraband, traded secretly across borders, more precious at times than gold. Was the resin the echo of a ritual gone wrong, or the trace of smuggling, uncovered by a man who knew too much? When the scribe vanished, there was no proclamation, no investigation recorded. He was simply gone. His name erased from the rolls, his position quietly replaced. In a land where names were carved into stone to last for eternity, his absence was louder than any inscription. To be forgotten in Egypt was the second death, the death of memory. And yet, in this erasure, clues remained. The cut papyrus, the ostracon, the salt, the resin. Thebes was a city built on belief that the gods protected order, that Pharaoh ruled by divine will, that the temple safeguarded justice. But beneath the surface, another story played out. A story of theft, silence, and disappearance. The vanished scribe stood at the center of this storm, his ink touching both the sacred and the corrupt. And when he fell silent, the entire city trembled with questions it dared not speak aloud. What really happened to him? Was he murdered by rivals eager to protect their thefts? Was he erased by priests who could not allow his records to see the light of day? Or did he himself choose to vanish, leaving behind fragments as a trail, a whisper to future generations that something had gone terribly wrong in the house of Amun? The first act of our story ends not with an answer, but with silence. A silence heavy enough to last 3,000 years. The silence of the vanished scribe left behind more than absence. It left fragments, whispers, traces scattered like broken pieces of a puzzle. And in those fragments, archaeologists and historians have tried to read the truth. The first and most haunting piece is the Ostracon, a small shard of limestone inscribed with the opening lines of a hymn. The words praise Amun, Lord of the hidden, guardian of justice. But the text is unfinished, broken in mid-thought, as though the hand that wrote it was suddenly interrupted. Stranger still, it was found face down. In Egyptian magic, inversion had power. To turn a figure upside down in a curse was to deny its life, to strip it of strength. To place a sacred text face down was to silence it. Was this an accident, or was it deliberate? A warning left for those who would discover it, a cry of defiance in the only language a scribe could use. The second clue lies in the papyrus fragments. Ancient ink on fragile fibers, written with precision but scarred by violence. Whole sections of grain tallies had been cut away, the papyrus sliced with a blade. Imagine the hand that once wrote those lines, steady and exact, now destroyed by another hand determined to erase them. Was it to hide missing grain, stolen rations that never reached the people? Or was it to silence the scribe himself, his accusations cut from the record as neatly as the fibers of the scroll? And then there were the footprints. In the dust of the record chamber, traces of crystallized salt were found. Salt had no place there. It was not used in ink, nor in papyrus. It was used in rituals of purification, sprinkled to banish evil, to cleanse corruption. But salt was also a commodity, traded along caravan routes, valuable enough to tempt theft. What were those crystals doing on the temple floor? Were they remnants of a ritual, hastily performed after a crime? Or had the scribe been investigating shipments, following the salt trail of smuggling that ran through Thebes like an underground river? Most unsettling of all was the smell. Resin, thick, pungent, lingering long after the man was gone. Resin was sacred. It sealed the flesh of the dead, binding them for eternity. It was burned in temples, rising as smoke to the gods. But resin was also profit. It came from distant lands, carried by traders through deserts and seas. To control resin was to control a luxury, and where luxuries gathered, corruption followed. The scent in the scribe's chamber. Was it the trace of embalming materials? A body treated in secret within those walls? Or was it the echo of contraband, smuggled goods hidden in the temple stores, uncovered by the man who wrote every tally? Each artifact, each clue, is a witness frozen in time. The Ostracon whispers of silenced words. The papyrus fragments speak of erasure and theft. The salt crystals sparkle with ritual or smuggling. The resin breathes of death and profit. And together, they weave a story that is less about one man and more about a system trembling with corruption. When modern archaeologists walk through the ruins of Karnak, they step over stones worn by centuries of feet, touch walls carved with prayers to Amun. But somewhere in those shadows, they know, a crime unfolded. The vanished scribe has no tomb, no statue, no inscription to preserve his memory. His legacy is only this: fragments, scattered and fragile, demanding to be read like evidence in a case that was never closed. And so we test the theories. Was this a ritual gone wrong? A sacrifice hidden within the temple walls? Was it corruption, a theft of grain and goods so great that a man had to be erased? Or was it a political act, the silencing of someone who knew too much about the flow of wealth between temple, palace, and people? The evidence does not give us answers, but it forces us to ask the questions. And in the asking, the silence of the scribe becomes a voice. In every mystery, the trail of evidence eventually leads us to people. Those who might have had the will, the means, and the motive. The vanished scribe of Thebes lived in a world where no one was untouched by corruption or ambition. To imagine his fate, we must step into the minds of those who could have wanted him gone. The first suspect is the corrupt official. In times of scarcity, grain was more precious than gold. Records from the Harris papyrus reveal widespread embezzlement, grain diverted from temple stores, rations stolen before reaching the tomb workers, and payments vanishing into the hands of those in power. The scribe was the man who held the pen that could expose these crimes. Perhaps he refused to alter the numbers. Perhaps he wrote too much truth. If so, he would have made enemies among the administrators who grew rich off theft. Silencing him would have been as simple as cutting his scrolls, erasing his name, and leaving his fate to the silence of the desert. The second suspect is the priesthood itself. The Temple of Amun was not only a religious center, but a political machine. High priests wielded power that rivaled Pharaoh, controlling estates, armies, and trade. If the scribe uncovered mismanagement within the priesthood, if he discovered resin smuggling through temple stores or offerings being diverted, then his loyalty to the gods may have clashed with the ambitions of men. The Ostracon left face down might even be read as a message, a scribe silenced by the very institution he served. Priests had the authority to erase a name, to remove him not only from the world of the living, but from the memory of eternity. And then there are whispers of a third suspect, the crown itself. In the final years of Ramesses III, the royal court was no stranger to conspiracy. The harem conspiracy, an attempt to assassinate the king, revealed how fragile Pharaoh's control had become. Could the vanished scribe have stumbled into matters far beyond temple grain? Perhaps his records touched royal revenues, exposing payments that funded plots against the throne. If so, he would not merely have been a nuisance to priests or officials. He would have been a danger to Pharaoh's survival. And in such a case, his erasure would have been swift, merciless, and absolute. There is, too, the possibility of personal betrayal. A rival scribe, jealous of position. A debtor, angry over recorded accounts. Even a family member entangled in debts that the scribe refused to conceal. The papyrus fragments do not speak names, but they hint at conflict, as if the ink itself remembers arguments now lost to time. Each of these suspects, Corrupt officials, powerful priests, royal conspirators, or personal rivals shared one truth. They all had something to lose if the scribe spoke. His pen was a mirror reflecting theft and ambition. And mirrors are often smashed when they show too much. The motives are clear. For the officials, it was greed. For the priests, it was power. For the crown, it was survival. For rivals, it was envy. And at the center of them all was one man, writing quietly in a chamber of stone, his words sharper than any blade. But to understand motive is not yet to understand the act. To know why he may have been silenced is only the beginning. What we must reconstruct next is how. The day, the hour, the sequence of events that led to a chamber filled with resin's smell and silence. That is the next step in this case, the attempt to rebuild the timeline of the vanished scribe. To understand the fate of the vanished scribe, we must try what investigators across centuries have always tried, to rebuild the sequence of events. We cannot know with certainty, but the fragments of evidence allow us to sketch a shadow of that day, or perhaps of several days, that led to silence. It begins at dawn. Thebes wakes to the rising sun, casting long shadows across the pylons of Karnak. Priests prepare their morning rituals, lighting incense, chanting hymns to Amun. Workers file into the temple courtyards, carrying jars of beer, baskets of bread, sacks of grain. Somewhere among them, the scribe walks in, palette of inks under his arm, ready to record the daily flow of offerings. Nothing seems unusual. To those around him, it must have looked like any other day. Yet in his chamber of records, the trouble surfaces. A delivery does not match the tally. Grain that should have filled the bins is missing. Numbers do not align. Perhaps the scribe dips his pen in black ink, writing a note that someone would rather not see preserved. Perhaps he pauses, sensing eyes watching from the doorway. As the hours pass, the trail grows darker. At midday, a witness later claimed, a smell lingered in the corridor near the scribe's chamber. Sharp, pungent, unmistakable resin. Some say it was brought for ritual. Others whisper it was spilled from jars meant for smuggling. Did the scribe open a sealed storehouse? Did he discover goods hidden within? In the dust near the threshold, salt crystals appear. Were they spilled by workers unloading a shipment, or scattered deliberately in a hurried ritual of cleansing after violence? Imagine the chamber now. Papyrus scrolls unrolled, some sliced apart, as if a knife had torn through not only the fibers, but the truths they carried. An ostracon rests on the floor, inscribed with a hymn left unfinished, then placed face down. Was this his final act, or the mark of those who silenced him? By evening, the scribe is gone. He does not emerge with the others when the temple gates close. No one records his departure. No one asks publicly where he has gone. The next day, another scribe takes his place, as though nothing happened. His name does not appear again in any register. In the official life of Egypt, he has ceased to exist. There are competing theories about what happened in those hours. Some argue he was killed within the temple walls, his body treated with resin in secret, perhaps buried under the very stones he once walked. Others believe he was taken away, silenced far from Thebes, his papyri destroyed behind him. A few imagine that he escaped, leaving behind his inverted ostracon as a cryptic clue, vanishing into the desert to survive in anonymity. Each theory casts the evidence in different light. If he was murdered, the resin is embalming, the salt purification, the papyrus cuts an attempt to erase his accusations. If he was exiled, the resin is contraband uncovered. The salt footprints those of smugglers. The papyrus a record too dangerous to be left intact. If he fled, then the Ostracon is his confession. The cut papyri his warning. The resin and salt merely echoes of the chaos he left behind. We cannot know which theory is true, but what is certain is that in the span of one day, a man at the center of Egypt's sacred economy disappeared without a trace. His life was reduced to fragments, and those fragments became the silence that endured for 3,000 years. The disappearance of a single scribe might seem a small thing, easily forgotten in the vast sweep of Egyptian history. Pharaohs rose and fell, armies clashed, empires stretched and shattered. But sometimes it is the smallest cracks that reveal the deepest fractures. And in the silence left by the vanished scribe of Thebes, we hear the echoes of a kingdom unraveling. For in the years that followed, corruption within the Temple of Amun grew only bolder. The wealth of the temple rivaled the crown itself. High priests of Amun commanded land, soldiers, and trade. The balance between pharaoh and priesthood tilted, until eventually the priests held power not only over offerings but over Egypt's destiny. The disappearance of one scribe may not have caused this shift, but it symbolizes it. The moment when truth in the records could no longer be trusted, when ink was silenced as easily as flesh. In law, the case also left traces. Later legal texts reveal harsher penalties for scribes caught falsifying accounts, or for those accused of stealing from temple stores. Perhaps it was a response to scandals like this, an attempt to control corruption by fear. Yet fear also ensured silence. Few dared to speak, knowing that to expose theft might lead to erasure, the second death, just as it had for the man whose name we no longer know. Religiously, the event stirred unease. A temple that was meant to embody Ma'at, the divine order, had shown its cracks. The Ostracon left face down became almost a symbol, a hymn unfinished, words silenced, a sacred voice inverted. Later generations of worshippers might not have known the story, but they sensed the truth. Confidence in the divine order was shaken, and when faith wavers, power falters. Politically, the silence of the scribe reflected the fragility of Ramesses III's reign. Within a few years, conspirators from his own harem attempted to assassinate him. The empire that once commanded the known world shrank into survival. Egypt would never again hold the same power it had under earlier dynasties. The vanished scribe of Thebes is like a ghost standing at that threshold, a reminder that when records lie, when voices are silenced, entire kingdoms can crumble. Legends even grew around such disappearances. In later tales whispered in villages, scribes were described as men who knew too much, men whose pens could topple thrones. Some said the gods themselves punished arrogance, striking down those who tried to reveal forbidden truths. Others believed that the souls of erased men wandered, restless, denied the afterlife because their names were lost. Whether myth or memory, the vanished scribe lived on, not as a man, but as a warning. And perhaps that is his greatest legacy. He teaches us that truth in records is fragile, that even sacred words can be cut, silenced, inverted. He shows us that corruption is not only a crime of grain and gold, but a wound that spreads into faith, into politics, into memory itself. The consequences of his disappearance were not simply personal, they were systemic. They were the unraveling of a world. 3,000 years have passed since the scribe of Thebes vanished into silence. The papyri are dust, the ostracon weathered, the resin scent long faded. And yet, his story still speaks, not in names or dates, for those are lost, but in the questions he forces us to ask. What does it mean when truth itself can be silenced? What happens when records, the very memory of a society, are cut, inverted, erased? The vanished scribe is more than a mystery of ancient Egypt. He is a mirror held up to humanity. We too live in a world where corruption can flourish in silence, where those who write the truth risk being silenced, where memory itself can be manipulated. The tools have changed, stone and papyrus replaced by screens and servers, but the struggle remains the same. Who controls the record controls the future. Who erases the name controls the past. The ostracon left face down is not only a relic of Thebes. It is a symbol of every unfinished voice, every truth cut short, every story buried but not forgotten. And in listening to his silence, we are reminded that history is not made only by kings and battles, but by the fragile ink of those who dared to write. Perhaps the scribe believed that by leaving fragments, an inverted hymn, a sliced papyrus, traces of salt and resin, he would one day be heard, and if so, then across millennia, his wish is fulfilled. For tonight, we have spoken his story again. He is not erased, he is remembered, and maybe that is the final victory against silence. If this epic story resonates with you, if you hear in it not only the silence of the past, but the questions of our present, then stay with us. More cases, more voices long buried, await. This file closes, but another will soon open.